Welcome to the Biz Doctor Podcast, my love letter to business owners the world over. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, award-winning business consultant and advisor fondly nicknamed the Biz Doctor by my clients. I help business owners who are burning the candle at both ends diagnose what is actually keeping them buried in the day-to-day busy work, and then formulate a treatment plan to adjust their business and team to fit them, so they can take a breath and a vacation and have more fun making a bigger impact than ever. So grab your favorite beverage and your earbuds, and let's dive into our latest episode. We've all seen them, the business owners and leaders who seem to have the Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to gold, and they seem to wake up everyone around them into similar high performance. So what makes these people different? Or what I'm even more curious about is how can we, you and me, become more like these individuals so we too can be even higher performers? Well, if you too are intrigued by how you can achieve success faster, create change in your life and business that lasts, and be a true high performer, dare I say without burning yourself out, then you are in for a treat with today's episode. Welcome back to the Biz Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, and I'm joined in the studio with Taylor Johnson. Let me introduce you to Taylor so you can see why I am so excited to have him on the show and dig into how we can all be more successful with his holistic approach to elite performance. Taylor began his career as a strength and conditioning coach in D1 Power 5 schools, ultimately leading him to the NFL and the San Francisco 49ers. During his NFL tenure, he managed strength and conditioning, nutrition, rehabilitation, and also overseeing their sports science initiatives to monitor and enhance athletic performance and recovery. Following his curiosity to develop elite cognitive performance, Taylor transitioned into the realm of esports. He became a VP of performance and built player and coach development programs for professional teams and academies, and coached some of the world's best gamers. In addition to coaching, Taylor helped lead teams pioneering software and research studies for cognitive athletes at AIM Labs. Blending neuroscience and gaming technology led to this creation of one of the largest esports training platforms in the world. Now Taylor works with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and executives to give them a competitive advantage by adopting a holistic approach to their personal and professional lives. He integrates transformational coaching, cognitive and physical strategies, leadership development, and systems thinking to optimize performance and longevity. He's also a partner of the Liminal Collective, a global community enabling humans to achieve the imaginable. Together, they focus on creating bespoke experiences for elite performers to unlock the next level of their potential physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Holy smokes, that is quite the journey, Taylor, and I'm so glad to have you on the show so we can really dig into this fascinating topic. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. I've been looking forward to this for so long.
Me too.
So I know I just shared a brief look into how you got here, but I would love to have you walk us through more about how you work with leaders and specifically what gets you so passionate about this work.
First I want to say I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to do what I do. I think so much of my journey has really been facilitated and supported by all the mentors and opportunities that have come my way, and I'm just incredibly grateful for that. And so a lot of the work that I do now is heavily influenced from the different experiences that I've had across traditional sport and gaming and esports, and then also in the startup and business space. And a lot of the work that I do now is with these business athletes, so they may self-identify as these high performers who are playing the game of business life and entrepreneurship at a really high level. And part of that is really understanding that there are certain foundational components that need to be in place to be able to play at a high level for as long as possible. And so really it's helping them deconstruct a lot of where they're at now, where they want to go. And part of that is also looking to the past and saying, okay, well, where have I been and what's worked and what's not? So really how I work with them is a full 360 view of this approach of where you've been, where you are now, where you want to go. And it's an iterative cycle. So really it's using concepts from design thinking to continue to iterate this process of the person they continue to become.
Amazing. I love this so much. So you just said a buzzword that I want to talk about, a business athlete. Yeah. What does that mean?
Harvard Business Review did an article around the corporate athlete, and they did a great job talking about there's 4 different areas. Essentially, it's the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, which very much maps across to the work that I've been thinking about and doing. And they did a really great job in the article. So I encourage people to check that out. And so for me, the business athlete, the reason why I don't say corporate, because I don't necessarily most of the people I don't work with are in corporate. They're outside of corporate. Maybe they have their own gig, they're solopreneurs, or they're in sales or something like this. So the business athlete, essentially it's an individual who may have an athletic background or may not, but really it's like they're taking the time to think deeply around how do they constantly improve? And they think of themselves as an athlete. So in terms of their training, recovery, the preparation, even going so far to build a support team around them, that's often where I come into play. I'm one of their support team members in that process. And really it's about achieving high performance and the longevity piece too. So it's one thing, for me, the distinction is, a high achiever is almost like a flash in the pan. Like anyone can be a high achiever for a short period of time. You can do the work, get the goal, and that's it. But a high performer is somebody who can consistently do that time and time again. And that's really what I'm most interested in. Like, how do you take the systems and process to do it at a high level and then continue to do that for as long as possible?
Mm-hmm. So that's the longevity piece of like, is this sustainable? Yeah. I think that's really
100%.
I think that's really important, especially in today's instant gratification startup VC world where it's like, go fast, go hard, break things, and then like, what are we actually doing? So I loved your definition of high performing, because I feel like high performing and elite performance are very buzzword sounding. And so you alluded to it a little bit, but I would love for you to tell me a little bit more about what those two words mean to you, and why would we, me, you, anybody listening, want to embody or be those two things?
Yeah, I think first, what I want to say is it's a choice, and it's not for everyone. I just want to be clear about that. I think it's not for everyone. I think there are standards in which we create for ourselves and what we live by, and that's awesome. There is no judgment. And I think what separates, a high performer who's playing at that level from the elite is really the mindset and the self-efficacy around how do they create the systems and structure and the environment around them to be able to play at that level. One of my mentors and colleagues, Jürgen Heitman with Liminal Collective, and he talks a lot about, you have SEAL teams, the different SEALs, the different groups, and then you have SEAL Team 6, Dev Group. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a completely different class of individuals that are in. Now, they're all amazing, for sure. And SEAL Team 6, Dev Group, is a different standard in which they operate by. And I think putting yourself in that situation, or to think, okay, well, what does it take? What does it take to be at the highest level? What does it take to be elite? And I think what's interesting in terms of the individuals I work with, the question we always ask, and it's a fun one to role play and say, okay, who do we benchmark ourselves against? What are our standards that we're going to measure ourselves by? Both internally for us, because that's what matters most. And then also externally, it's okay, who do we want to benchmark ourselves against? And so, for instance, thinking about, decision-making. Okay, so if you only look at people in your industry, let's take, for instance, I'm working with a salesperson right now, like a high-level sales exec. I'm like, okay, so your decision-making in the negotiation in sales, if you're only comparing yourself to another decision maker in sales, you might be an 8 out of 10. But if you think about your decision-making relative to somebody in the SEAL teams, you're probably a 2 out of 10 because the context is different. But what that shows you is there's room to grow and learn. And I think just that mindset is what separates a high achiever from a high performer to the elite. It's really about how you're approaching the game that you're playing.
That's really interesting. I want to dive a little bit deeper into what you were saying about systems, because I know the work that I do is teams and operations, and obviously getting business owners unburied from their business so they can have that true entrepreneurial freedom. But sometimes they buck against the systems, because I think there's a part of us that doesn't recognize that the systems actually give you more freedom than if you don't have them. So I want to hear what you think about systems.
Yeah, I think first it's important, like Gall's law. And the definition of Gall's law is essentially a complex system can only be built from a simple system that works. And so you have to go back and say, okay, what is the simplest system that's in place that's actually functioning and working? that you can then start to build more nuance and complexity on top of. Another analogy would be like, people use this all the time of building a house on sand, right? If your foundation is not in place and sturdy and have the right structural integrity, no matter what an amazing house you'll build, it's always going to be compromised. And so when I think of systems, it's really about, okay, what are the interdependent parts? Because everything's connected. So it's taking a moment to say, okay, what is actually going on here in the landscape of how you're doing business? And what is actually going on here in the landscape of how you're doing life and relationships and health? And it's really trying to get this, heat map of all these different areas and say, okay, what systems are working and where's the breakdown? And I think a great question to ask is, the quality of your output is going to be related to the quality of your inputs and the quality of your system. So if you're not having the results you want, well, we need to go all the way back and say, okay, well, what is the simplest system that everything else is built upon? And let's start with that. And then you kind of follow the chain down.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of when people are like, oh, we have a revenue problem. I'm like, you don't have a revenue problem. You have like, there's something upstream that created the revenue problem. Exactly. So I think that's a really important tidbit for people to take away there. So
I love that. Yeah. One more point on that, because I think that's such a good, essentially what you're calling out is like the symptom and actually the root problem. And another way is like asking the inverse question. It's like, okay, if I think I have this problem, what's the real problem I would need to have this presenting symptom? Or asking the question, what dysfunction or what breakdown would need to be true in order for X, Y, and Z to show up? And that's an interesting thought experiment too.
What I love about these questions, especially for me, so one of my mentors said, entrepreneurs love to be told, or they want to be told what to do, but they don't want to be told what to do. So we want the answers, but we don't ever like anybody actually telling us what to do. That's why we're entrepreneurs. But when you ask really thoughtful questions, that's when you can have them actually think of the solution. And so that helps them actually integrate and follow and implement much faster because they're actually telling themselves.
Totally. I love that. Yeah. I mean, such a wise mentor, and awesome for you to be able to bring those questions to life with your clients. That's probably why you're amazing at what you do, amongst other things. Similar for me, I had a mentor share with me. He goes, look, if you tell them the how and you point out that insight to them, it's not going to really land for them and be as meaningful as if you ask the questions and they discover it for themselves. And he goes, this is pretty interesting. I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around it. He goes, you need to stop calling yourself a coach. I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, that's part of my identity.
Oh,
like,
no.
Wow, this is interesting.
Trigger.
Yeah. And I was like, well, he goes, honestly, if you think about it, a coach is authoritarian by nature. I'm going to build this plan. I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'll benchmark you against this plan. I was like, well, okay, that's interesting. I don't see myself as an authoritarian figure, but there's probably some truth to that. If I'm being honest, like, okay, like here's the roadmap. I'm like, what do you call yourself? He goes, I'm a consultant. I'm like, oof, that doesn't feel like it encapsulates everything. But he made an interesting point. He said, look, part of my job, and he works with big hedge fund guys, CEOs, big corporations, and he's a no BS kind of guy. And he goes, part of my job is to ask the questions, the hard questions. And he goes, if I were to give them the answer or solution, I would rob them of the creative process in which they put in motion. He goes, so part of my job as a consultant is to give the reasoning, which is the why, ask the questions or give the context of like the what. He goes, and the how is up to them. He goes, now I'm going to be there to help course correct and ask more questions, right? But I can't tell them how to do the thing. And that really stuck with me. That's been a shift for me in how I still call myself a coach, and I always check to make sure that I'm giving as much space as possible for them to figure out the how.
I love that. I kind of want to take a slight tangent on this coach versus consultant, because I think there's so much juice here. And actually, it's funny. I'm going through a little bit of a LinkedIn rebrand, and they were going through my bio, and they said coach in there, and I said, guys, I'm not a coach. And they said, but you are. And I said, no, I'm not. Please take that word out. I don't resonate with that. And I do think that there's something really powerful in being the alchemist, because that's kind of what I think I am, is
Mm,
like the alchemist of how can I take what exists in a business, what exists in a leader, and actually transmute it into something that's going to serve them better, that's going to serve the team better, that's going to create this legacy, this sustainability. And when I look at my like most successful engagements, it's always where there's a partnership and we're co-creating together and they're coachable. So while I'm not a
yes.
coach, there's a certain level of when I look at high performers and people who are really successful, they're very coachable. Have you seen this?
Yes. 100%. I do see that with my clients. I think this comes back to what's baked into the business athlete kind of definition for me is, they realize I think high performers have a deep sense of self-awareness. And part of that sense of self-awareness is that they can't do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think the average athlete in professional sports, so an athlete in professional sports on average has anywhere between like 9 to 13 coaches. If you factor in strength coach, nutritionist, head coach, assistant coaches, and the whole 9 yards. And so if you think about the coachability, people just have a sense of like, yeah, I can't do this. That's why people hire coaches. That's why people read books. I mean, I even see books as a means of mentorship and coaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like mentors at your fingertips. And so I do see this trend of individuals becoming actually more and more open to getting coached or hiring people to help them solve a problem. And I love this quote from Alex Hormozy where he basically talks about, he's like, you not knowing how to make $1 million, however much you're making right now, the difference of that is the tax you pay on ignorance. I think that's awesome. He goes, if you don't know how to make $1 million, the difference of that is the ignorance tax.
Yeah.
And he's like, so you figure it out, pay that down, learn the skills, get around people to help you accelerate your learning and your growth. And I think the same could be true for health and relationships and all these different areas. And so I think it becomes really powerful when, you work with an individual who, as you and I both know, and other people know, like when you're coachable, it makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is that co-creation, like you talked about. It's like, hey, what are we working on here? Like, what are we really going towards? It's a teaming. And I think part of that is like us in the position of, influence from being the coach or consultant is leading by example and saying like, hey, here's how we're going to operate. But let's co-create and have it be an agreement. And I think there's a transference that happens because when the individual, the clientee, is in that space that we create for them, where we're having these conversations, we're asking these questions, we're modeling the behaviors of what it looks like to be grounded and curious and regulated, that transfers to different aspects in their life, whether they're showing up in business with their teams or showing up with their partners at home or their friends recreationally. It all matters.
It does. It does. I love that. And it actually just like that quote gave me goosebumps. And I think it also brought back another word that I think is so prominent in high performing people, which is radical accountability. Like if I'm not getting the results that I want, whether, I'm working out with Jay at the gym or my nutritionist or my pickleball coach, like at the end of the day, the only one that's responsible for my results is me. And I think that's something that more people get to own is that level of accountability.
Yes. And I think part of that accountability is also, so one of my other mentors shared this with me. He goes, you need to be very mindful of the people you surround yourself with and who you get your advice from. And he goes, because part of that radical accountability is surrounding yourself with the people that, you don't take advice from people whose life you don't want or some aspect of a life that you don't want. And so, taking advice from somebody who has an amazing business but has an incredibly dysfunctional family life, you need to take that into consideration and take accountability, responsibility on your end of like, okay, how am I going to parse this information and compartmentalize it? And know, like, okay, this advice may come with through the lens of like, this individual doesn't care about family, or this is the byproduct of the choices that this person has made. And I think the radical accountability too, it's like it all comes back to us. I think this is the self-awareness piece too. Giving ourselves the grace to say, look, we're just figuring it out. And part of that is you cannot grow and have everything figured out at the same time. It's contradictory.
Ooh.
Right? Because if you had it all figured out, you wouldn't be growing, you wouldn't be learning, you wouldn't be stretching, you wouldn't be increasing your capacity. And so it's taking ownership of like, if you're not getting results you want, well, maybe you've stagnated. Maybe you're not actually growing and you need to change it up.
That's so, that's so triggering to hear, because I think we all want to get it figured out, but we got to remember that in growth, that's kind of the messy middle. So I think that was such a good nugget. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I mean, another example of this just recently too is, Father's Day just passed, and, I'm recently engaged, and fatherhood is definitely on track for me, which I am so excited about. And so this last Father's Day, I reached out to probably like 50 men that I've met over the course of my life that I really respect. And I asked them, was like, recently engaged, what advice would you give me for marriage and also fatherhood, knowing that it's coming? Oh, so good. And one of the reoccurring, like, I'm so grateful, one, for them, and two, like, them taking the time to respond and share it. And three is like, I have a full document now of like all these just nuggets. Like some are probably more profound than others, but they're all very real and heartfelt. And one of them that really stood out to me was, he goes, always have the mindset of you're learning. He was talking about being a father. And he goes, I've always tried to maintain the mindset of like, I'm 12 years old and I'm still figuring shit out. He goes, so I'm learning as they're learning. And the whole goal of it is to just stay curious. And that's like, that resonates with me, because that's my whole sign off, is like, stay curious.
I love that. Well, I think that it's important to stay curious, because then you're always in that perpetual growth, and it helps you be more empathetic, and it's just such a great place to be. And it's actually a really good segue, because we were talking about awareness, and I want to know, what do you think the biggest blind spot most leaders have that's preventing them from becoming truly high performing?
I think first we need to ask the question, how do they define high performance? Like, what are the standards, and like, what does success actually look like for them? So I think that actually exposes probably one of the biggest blocks, is having this vivid understanding of like what vision they're actually creating. And is it in alignment with their values? So sometimes what I come across is there's this rift between what they value, or they say they value, and their behaviors towards this vision. And there's this rift between the two. And like internally, it creates a lot of conflict, creates a lot of parts conflict, right? Of like, well, part of me wants this, but the other part of me wants that. And like that comes up quite a bit. And so I think what tends to happen, especially the people that I work with, are, they're up leveling in some aspect of their life more times than not in its career. And so by the very nature of that, they're stepping into a new stage and phase. And they have this awareness of like, what got them here is not going to get them there. And so there's this refactoring, there's this reworking of their value set, because what we value in different stages and phases is very different than previous stages and phases. Like what I valued in my teens, very different than my 20s, is very different than my 30s, and thank God, for great reasons, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that. And so that's part of the process of this discovery. So you asked me what the biggest blocker is. It's probably this it's one of two things. It's either like these mental blocks that they continue to get in their own way, and this like vision drift where they're chasing these high levels, but as they're ramping up, they're not creating a new clear vision with new values to match it.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because I see a lot of people running away from things they don't want rather than towards the things they do want, and saying like, is this in vision? And I actually had a LinkedIn post last week where I said, I think that a lot of people struggle with boundaries because they're not clear on their vision. And so if you're not clear on your vision, then it's really hard to have a boundary and say, I don't want to spend X amount of money on this or time on this because it's not aligning me to my vision. So I think
100%.
That's
100%.
Very profound.
My mentor gets on me about that all the time. He goes, one, just for this is the same mentor who's like very hard, and the distinction between the coach and consultant. For more context, when I get on a call with him, I once asked him how he's doing. He goes, ask me a better question.
I like him. I want to meet him. Can I meet him?
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, I'll introduce you. He's amazing. And he goes, ask me a better question. But the point what I'm going to get into is he'd ask me, he's like, what do you really want?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you really want? Because I would go to him and I would say, I'm torn between this and that. He goes, well, if you were actually clear on what you wanted, you wouldn't have this riff. The choice would be the choice, and you would continue to take action towards that path. He goes, you need to get clear on what you want. And that's what really started to put me down this path of like these clarity exercises that I take clients through and doing the winning formula session to understand like what the past has been like, what's worked, what hasn't. Even the breakthrough sessions that I do with clients to really unpack and say, okay, what is the refactoring that needs to happen to create the space to then have this new vision be created to then take action. So, the vision is so important.
So important. And so, we talked a little bit offline about your framework and how it allows people to reframe any mental blocks or limiting beliefs. It optimizes their energy, effort, well-being. They can tap into their true potential, play their own game. And you just is like achieving that focused, optimal performance in all aspects of their life. So I want you to share a little bit more about this 3-step framework that allows someone to have those amazing things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's been pieced together over the years just from different mentors and experiences, right? So it's not uniquely my own in that like each component comes from different areas, and what's unique about it is just how I've packaged it. And so really it's looking at different evolutions that you can go through that really in itself is one giant evolution. So a lot of the foundation of the work is based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And for those that are familiar with Joseph Campbell, or for those who are not, essentially it's this classic archetype or story of you have this hero, they cross the threshold, they go into the unknown, they have lessons, they meet a guy, they battle some demons and dragons, maybe they get the girl, maybe they don't, but they come back a transformed person.
Mm-hmm.
And that essentially happens multiple times in our lives. Like we go through these stages and phases and evolutions. And so much of the work that I do is built on that premise of we are constantly evolving. Like there is no maintaining. We're either getting better or we're getting worse. Yep. And it's a flux between the two. It's just the truth of it. And so the first part of the framework I call the winning formula. And so that is where, it's a 2-hour call, and it's a very intentional setting where we drop in and say, okay, where have you been? What is your recipe for success? Because oftentimes high performers are really good at what they do, and they may not actually know what they actually do that makes them so good at what they do.
Yeah.
Like what happens before, during, and after specific moments where they're just on, right? So part of that is unpacking and saying, okay, we look in a certain area of life, let's take career, let's look at a couple of evolutions, anywhere between 3 or 5. And what is your winning formula? How do you do transformation? How do you do success? What does this look like? What are the mindsets? What are the beliefs? What are the behaviors? Who are the helpers? Who are the guides? Who are the villains? Who are your greatest opponents and challenges? And essentially what it does is it gives people an opportunity to slow down, to get all this information and say, okay, what's actually under the hood? Mm-hmm. What's working for me? What's against me? And this is important. You called out a great thing of in these different stages and phases, am I moving towards or am I moving away from something?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always listening and looking for this too, because the direction and the energy matters. And so by the end of this session, they get a clear understanding of what's working and what's not. And then we put some systems in place, and like the intention, if that's all they do, then that's plenty of information to say, okay, now here's a roadmap moving forward. Let's co-create that vision, go take action, and let it rip. What tends to happen though is through this process, they go through this and they realize there's a lot of these like negative emotions or limiting beliefs that have come up and have persisted. I'm like, okay, well, is that working for you? And I'm like, or something else. Like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, let's do something about it. And so that's the second segment of my coaching framework, which is a breakthrough session. And that's based on mental emotional release. And so it's a process where we are going in, it's a giant reframe, so the first aspect of the breakthrough session is really an even deeper detailed personal history around all of the presenting problems related to some of those negative emotions or limiting beliefs, right? Because there's presenting problems like, hey, I'm not taking action on this thing. I procrastinate here. I play small here. These are presenting problems. Like we talked about earlier on our podcast, the revenue issue is not the issue. It's something happening upstream. So in this scenario, it's the presenting problems are not the actual problem. It's systemic of a root issue. So that's really what we find in that first session. And it's powerful for people because it's a guided conversation where really it's allowing them to see what's going on. It's really holding them back. And then once they see it, they can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And then it's the process of going through release work around anger, fear, sadness, guilt, and shame related to that specific root issue. And it's just a conversation, talking them through it. They're the ones doing the work. They're the ones reframing, mapping it. And I love that conversation because it's giving back power to that person. It's creating that space. And what's wild about that is we elicit their values twice, before the release work and after release work. And I have never had a client not change their values because their first initial set of values is built on baggage.
Yeah.
Everything they've wanted, what they think they value, is actually built on whatever root issue was causing these presenting problems, which makes them think that these are their values. So once we get a new set of values, then we're off to the races. And it's about, okay, now who is the person you're becoming physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? And that ties into the back end of my coaching, which takes them out 6 to 12 months, where we start to build the systems and process. And essentially, it's, for those that are familiar with product development, it's design thinking and product development. Except the product that we're building is this new version of themselves in a specific area. We're saying, okay, what are the critical success factors? What are the sub factors? What are the behaviors? And a lot of the coaching and accountability becomes, do your behaviors match your values? Because your values drive beliefs and beliefs drive your values. Values drive beliefs and beliefs drive behaviors. So if your behaviors aren't matching your values, well, then we got to look up and downstream and say, okay, well, what's going on here? So that's a very fun engagement too. And clients, again, like we talked about, it's giving them the power. It's teaching them how to do these design sprints, because once they learn that, even the release work, once they learn that, those are tools they can take for the rest of their life.
Oh, that sounds so impactful and powerful. And I'm sure y'all that are listening are asking yourself, how do I connect with Taylor? So before I get to my last two questions, and trust me, you guys are going to want to stick around and hear these, why don't you share how listeners can further connect with you and just get more juicy goodness of your expertise?
Yeah. LinkedIn is probably the best place. It's where I post a lot of my content. So LinkedIn's Taylor Johnson Performance. We could put our links I'll put my links in the bio for the listing, and then my website, taylorjohnsonperformance.com. But LinkedIn's probably the best place. Please reach out. Would love to have a conversation or have a strategy session. I love what I do.
Yeah.
And I love having the conversations and giving value. It's just lights me up.
Yeah. And there's something really special about being able to unlock the greatness that is already in someone. Like it's just, it's kind of an addiction. I feel that. So we have covered a lot, but are there any last nuggets or pieces of information that you want to make sure you share with our listeners as we wrap up? Or as I like to put it, what don't people ask you that you wish they would?
Oh, that's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions. It's funny because I always ask it and no one ever asks me that question. So that's good. I think one of the things that maybe I wish people asked more about or kind of checked in on is what was the hardest thing I've ever done? I think part of our evolutions is we go through these pivotal moments that transform our lives. And so my answer to that is, one of the things that comes to mind is it was about 5 years ago, and getting out of a relationship that completely rocked my world. I think that was a make or break it for me in terms of, I had two paths. One was good and one was very bad in terms of how I was going to respond to that. And I'm really proud of myself for choosing the path that really led towards more self-discovery and really, really helping myself. And I think that's where, we talked about that radical accountability and responsibility really came into play of saying, okay, I am fully responsible for my life. And this is what I want to create for myself. And, for those that are out there that are going through different times when, mental health is a real thing. That relationship was one aspect, but I was also totally burnt out from working in a corporate job and just completely tired and wired and just, not practicing what I preached in terms of taking care of myself. And therefore I wasn't able to take care of others. So that was one of those moments that was a big wake up call for me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
All right, this is what I ask all of my guests. What is a book that you think every leader, entrepreneur, or business owner should read and why?
Ooh. Oh, that's another great question. There's so many. I mean, the first one that comes up, I'll just say it, The Alchemist.
Oh, such a good book.
Yeah, I say that because, I think entrepreneurship is the fast track to self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think The Alchemist does a really amazing job of telling this beautiful story of, building a life and learning and lessons and trials and tribulations, which is entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And I think, that's a book I go back and read every couple of years, and every time I get some new nuggets from it. There's plenty of other books that are probably more technical and tactical and strategic, but I think The Alchemist for me is what I'll go with.
Okay. You can share one more if you would like.
Okay. I'd say 10X is easier than 2X by Dan Sullivan. There's a lot in that book that I model in my coaching. It's in some of my questions in the winning formula. It's definitely woven into the fabric of my coaching and how I kind of build out things. I mean, in there, he asks some amazing questions around unique abilities, which I think he actually got from Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap. Like your zone of genius and unique abilities. That's another great book. I'll drop 3, sneak that one in there. But 10X is easier than 2X. I mean, read through that. There's knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb. And I think the biggest thing with anything reading wise, and I think we've talked about this before, is it's one thing to read a book. It's another thing to actually implement it.
Mm-hmm. And
so I think with any knowledge that you are acquiring, rapidly iterate and implement. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way you'll actually make it stick.
100%. So the third book that you snuck in there was Zone of Genius. Was that it?
No, it's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
The Big Leap. Oh, yeah. It's literally right next to me. One of my hands down favorite books. Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'll say, because I love books. So this is just a fraction of the books.
I know. Same.
I think what really changed for me is when I started reading more books outside the domain that I was in. I think you learn so much more about your specific industry when you open the aperture and you start to read more about psychology and economics and even physics and like systems, and because it's all related.
Yeah.
Right. It is all related. And I think if you want to gain a deeper understanding of the industry that you're in, research outside of it.
Here. Oh, dang. I could talk to you all day. This has been great. But it's time for us to wrap up. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing so many great, as we call them, golden nuggets with our audience. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time. And again, it's grateful to be here.
Of course. All right, folks, sadly, that is it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening in. If anything we shared sparked something in you, we'd love for you to rate and review our show and share this episode with your friends or other business owners. I also so enjoy hearing from you. So let's connect. Tag or DM me on Instagram at It's Lauren Goldstein or LinkedIn or wherever you hang out on the interwebs. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe so you are the first to get notified when our next episode is live and ready for your ears. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Biz Doctor Podcast. Now, I like to say that friends don't let friends WebMD your business. So if you're wondering what your next steps could be, here are some options for you. No matter what, head to the show notes or to my website, goldenkeypartnership.com, for some impactful resources to support you getting out from under your business. That's also where you'll find the links to learn more about our services and how we support business owners, just like you, who are ready to make the successful jump from business operator in the trenches to visionary business owner with more freedom and flexibility. All of that info is on our website, so pop on over to learn more or get in touch. goldenkeypartnership.com. Finally, if you love the Biz Doctor podcast, I'd be so grateful if you would share it with your friends and network and give us a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast.
This is Story Studio Network.